very difficult circumstances. So they were not sure would they be able to cope with it, or would there be riots or social problems.
The Army's documentary footage portrays an idyllic world under the ice. In the outside world, however, the Cuban Missile Crisis is threatening to trigger a new world war. In 1962, Soviet ships deliver nuclear missiles to Cuba, right on America's doorstep. A threat on a scale hitherto unknown. The country is put on a war footing. Atomic bomb shelters are set up inside public buildings. Grocery stores, and not only those in Florida, are stripped bare, as Americans succumb to panic buying. The army is on high alert. The president is openly threatening war on the Soviets.
It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response from the Soviet Union.
Kennedy's resolve catches Khrushchev off guard. Realizing he has overplayed his hand, the Soviet leader recalls his missiles from Cuba. His ships turn back. For Fidel Castro and his ally in Moscow, 1962 becomes a turning point. The future of Camp Century and Project Iceworm is also at stake in 1962. But the soldiers stationed there will be the last ones to learn of it.
Project Iceworm was evaluated by the Department of Defense in 1962 under the Kennedy administration. And we know that this evaluation, even though it was favorable, the Department of Defense in the end said no to Project Iceworm.
After only a few years in operation, Camp Century is close to collapse. Despite the insulation, the heat coming from the houses is causing problems for the structure of the tunnels. The shifting glaciers also play their part. The piles of snow can no longer be cleared by hand.
The ice cap is not a solid piece of ice. It's quite dynamic in fact. So it moves all the time. It flows from the middle of the ice cap and up towards the oceans. And this movement caused the tunnels of Camp Century to deform and eventually collapse.
In 1966, the US Army has to abandon Camp Century. The road from Thule to the polar ice caps is still closed, as is the icy path to the camp, once marked with flags. The Army take their nuclear reactor with them as they leave, and everything else remains, to be fossilized forever under the ice. But in an era of unprecedented climate change, there is no forever anymore. Station North, a Danish military base. It's the northernmost inhabited point in Greenland. From here, climate scientists are studying the ice sheets around the North Pole. Polar researchers from the German Alfred Wegener Institute are analyzing the sea ice, while others study the ice on land. Greenland's ice caps are melting, with repercussions for the entire world. But the melting ice is also bringing to light some long-forgotten secrets. According to climate predictions, the impact of Camp Century may yet be felt, 50 years after the project was consigned to the past. When Camp Century was abandoned, most of the radioactive waste was left behind, with other toxic byproducts such as PCBs and vast quantities of diesel. Scientific forecasts predict that by the end of this century, a moving glacier could carry all this waste towards the bay near Thule.
The ecological threats are very serious. Any nuclear waste is of ecological danger, regardless whether that's on ice or on land. And nuclear waste just left behind is not okay. That's a risk environmentally, that's a risk to the world ecology, and that's a risk on violating our rights on polluting our country without our acceptance.
Aleqa Hammond was the Prime Minister of Greenland and represented her country in the Danish Parliament. When glaciologists wrote about the risks posed by Camp Century, Hammond appealed to the government in Copenhagen for more information. But instead of answers, all she got back were excuses and obfuscation. To this day, nothing has changed.
I see a big cover-up on this. Because if it's not a cover-up, why is it that it takes so many years for us to try to get any answer from Denmark? Why is it that Denmark is not raising their hands towards the United States for polluting the ice cap in this sense? Why is it that we have to struggle and use lots of power, lots of energy, and lots of time to try to get any answer out of the Foreign Ministry of Denmark? If that's not a cover-up, what is it then?
Aleqa Hammond is a campaigner for Greenland's independence from Denmark. The next generation should not, in her view, suffer the consequences of historic contamination. The toxic remains of Camp Century must never be allowed to enter the food supply.
I expect a surveillance, I expect cleaning up, I expect scientific research to check up and give an answer to all the questions that Greenland has given.
The Swiss glaciologist Horst Marchgold was, together with the Canadian researcher William Colgan, the first scientist to point out the environmental risks posed by Camp Century. In 2017, Denmark caved to pressure from Greenland and sent an international expedition to investigate the claims. Marchgold joined the researchers on their trip. A chartered plane drops the scientists at the spot where Camp Century once stood. They spend 2 weeks here, studying the ice around the abandoned site. From above, there is no trace of the settlement left. The tunnels and houses are buried under 60 years of snowfall.
Das ist ja das Spannende. Man steht dort oben, es ist einfach eine unendliche weiße Wüste. Man weiß, dass 30 Meter unter den eigenen Füßen liegen fast 10.000 Tonnen Müll.
Summer 2017. The weather only permits a few days of research.
Alles ist noch dort, aber weil es sich heutzutage in 30 bis 70 Meter Tiefe befindet und weil da eben mindestens 30 Meter Schnee drauf liegt, ist das so flach wie ein Pfannkuchen.
The glaciologists record data about the snowmelt and measure the underground layers with a radar, which they pull behind them on skis. This way, they can locate the toxic waste stored under the ice. They then extract ice samples from 200 feet below the surface in order to test them for radioactivity. Drilling into the waste itself is off limits.
Wir waren auch verpflichtet, dass wir die Hinterlassenschaften selber nicht anbohren. Wir waren dafür nicht ausgerüstet und zweitens ist es auch eine Sicherheitsfrage für uns selber.
What will happen in the next 70 years? Will Camp Century free itself from its icy grave and end up in the sea near Thule? Studies show that the ice around the camp is indeed getting warmer, but dangerous levels of radioactivity have not yet been discovered. It will take further research expeditions and clear answers from Copenhagen, if indeed they ever come. While the authorities have published scientific data online, interview requests have been turned down, and the leaders of the expedition have been forbidden to talk about their findings. Denmark's silence on the matter means that the truth around Camp Century remains shrouded in secrecy, as does the missile research project known as Iceworm, which was carried out at the camp, but whose details are classified by the US government. But for better or worse, the melting of the ice caps will keep Camp Century in the public eye for years to come. And it's an achievement that should not be forgotten. The first ever human settlement built under the ice that accomplished what it was designed for, at least for 6 whole years.
Camp Century skulle have været en del af USA's atomslagstyrke, og den var stadig under opbygning i 1961, da John F. Kennedy blev præsident i USA. På det tidspunkt er stemningen mellem Sovjet og USA på et lavpunkt, som vi også lige kunne høre, og det kommer til at præge JFK's første turbulente år i Det Hvide Hus. Det er straks.